They said it was just a business decision. That's what Evan Blake, the fresh-faced COO in a designer blazer and too much cologne, told me as he stood in my office with a manila envelope and a tight corporate grin. Jack, you've done a lot for this company, but we're pivoting. The board wants dynamic leadership moving forward. That word, dynamic, hit harder than the envelope he dropped on my desk. After 17 years building this place, from a cramped warehouse into a national supply chain hub, they handed me a generic severance and a polite shove out the door. No thank you. No retirement party. Just a handshake and a pitiful look from the HR rep, who didn't even know how many nights I slept in this office during crunch time. I looked at Evan and didn't flinch. I knew something he didn't. That smug little power play, it was built on sand. He thought I was a harmless relic, a numbers guy from another era. What he didn't know, what nobody in that glass tower knew, was that I wasn't just an old VP. I was the majority owner of this entire company thanks to my late brother's trust, set to activate on my 58th birthday, last week. So I took the envelope, stood up slowly, and shook his hand. Thanks, Evan. This clears things up. He smiled, thinking he'd won. I smiled, knowing I'd just let the fox believe he ate the farm. It was just after sunrise when I stepped into Hastings & Bell, the old law firm my brother trusted for decades. The waiting room still smelled like leather chairs and pipe tobacco, even though no one smoked in there anymore. Mr. Hastings, gray suit, older than time, steady as ever, greeted me with a nod and handed me a thick envelope with a gold seal. Your brother left clear instructions, he said. This activates on your 58th birthday. No sooner. No exceptions. I took it to my truck and sat behind the wheel for a full hour before opening it. Inside was a letter, written in my brother's plain handwriting. Jack, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're ready, it said. What followed stopped me cold. A notarized document outlining a trust that held 70% of the company's shares. My company now. He'd never sold his shares. He held on to every last one, quietly, privately, for me. I know what you built here. I also know how they'll treat you without my name to protect you, he wrote. Let them underestimate you. Let them show their true colors. When the time's right, you'll know what to do. I sat there stunned, staring at a piece of paper that handed me more power than any board title or executive suite ever could. Not just a seat at the table, the whole damn table. And I realized then, I didn't lose my job. They gave me the perfect setup. Let them think they won. Let them think I'm out. Because now, I wasn't just a man they fired. I was the man who owned the building they just tried to kick me out of. After the firing, I sat on my porch that night with a beer in hand and the trust documents locked away in the drawer beside me. I kept thinking about the word Evan used, leadership. As if he had any clue what that meant. To him, leadership was a presentation deck, a firm handshake, and being loud in board meetings. But real leadership? That was the 12 Christmases I spent on warehouse floors making sure holiday shipments got out on time. It was learning everyone's name, from the janitor to the dock foreman, and knowing who just had a baby and who was caring for a sick spouse. Evan never saw those people. He didn't care if the gears worked, only that he could take credit when they did. And the board, they ate it up. Flashy reports, big words, PowerPoints that looked like they were made in Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, I was considered outdated because I wore work boots more than wingtips. They mistook quiet for weak, steady for stale. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just disappointed. Especially because the house we built wasn't just under new management. It was being gutted from the inside out by men who thought charm was the same as character. Let them keep thinking that. Let them believe they've moved on from the old guard. I knew the truth. The foundation doesn't care how shiny the walls are. And I was the foundation. The following Monday, I sat across from Mr. Hastings again. Same oak table, same calm presence. But this time, I wasn't the stunned recipient of a surprise inheritance. I was a man with a plan. "Let's move forward," I told him. He slid over a set of forms. Shareholder declaration, corporate control documentation, meeting request notices. All legal, all airtight. The trust was already active. I had the votes. Now I just had to pull the pin. Hastings looked up over his glasses. "You sure you want to do this now?" I didn't even blink. I gave them a chance to do right by the company. They chose ego over integrity. "I'm to clean house." He nodded and got to work. That same afternoon I made a list. Names I trusted, departments that had quietly crumbled, reports that had been doctored under Evan's direction. I dug up the internal surveys he never showed the board. One, in particular, stood out. Employee satisfaction, down 42% since Evan took over. Day to day, grievances ignored, raises frozen for staff while exec perks tripled. And somewhere in the middle of all that, they decided I was the problem. I wasn't planning a comeback out of bitterness. I was planning it out of duty. Because my brother didn't build this place so it could be hollowed out by salesmen in slim-fit suits. And he sure as hell didn't leave it to me so I'd walk away quietly. Let them laugh at the old guy on the way out. Let them strut. In a few days, I'd be walking back into that boardroom. But not as an employee. I'd be walking in as the man who owned it. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The documents would do the talking. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Within 10 days of my so-called departure, the shipping dock missed 2 major deliveries, both clients I'd personally secured and kept loyal for over a decade. The inventory system, which I'd helped build from scratch, fell into chaos because no one had updated the maintenance protocols. Vendors started backing off, citing uncertainty in operations. The grapevine buzzed louder than ever. Quiet whispers in the break room turned into questions during department meetings. Who's running things now? Why are we getting conflicting orders? Evan tried to cover it up with press releases and pep talks, but the staff weren't buying it. Folks I'd worked shoulder to shoulder with for years texted me late at night. "It's not the same without you here. They don't even know who does what." The truth was out. Leadership wasn't just about ideas, it was about trust. And trust doesn't show up in spreadsheets. It shows up when the systems run smoothly because someone made sure the right hands were on the right levers. Without me, the gears were grinding. The confidence that once filled our hallways was leaking out like a slow puncture. And Evan, he was busy flying out to innovation summits while the walls were quietly closing in. I didn't need to rush back. I just needed to wait. Every mess they made without me only tightened the noose they'd unknowingly tied around themselves. Tuesday morning. The shareholder meeting was already underway when I stepped into headquarters. Pressed navy suit, polished boots, no entourage. Just a black folder tucked under my arm and 70% of the company in my back pocket. The receptionist nearly choked on her coffee when she saw me. "Mr. Turner," she stammered. "Good morning," I said with a smile. Upstairs, the boardroom buzzed with the kind of forced energy that happens when people try to talk past a looming storm. Evan was already at the front, arms in motion, delivering some speech about market acceleration and pivoting the brand. Half the board was nodding politely. The other half looked like they were trying to stay awake. The door clicked shut behind me, and suddenly the room froze. Evan's voice caught in his throat. "Jack," he said, blinking. "This is a closed." "I know." I cut him off, calmly walking to the head seat. "Which is why I'm here." I dropped the folder onto the table, opened it slowly, and slid out the trust deed, voting share certificate, and a stack of performance audits. Effective as of my 58th birthday, I control 70% of voting shares in this company. This meeting is now mine. Silence. A chair creaked. One board member cleared his throat. "Is this real?" he asked, scanning the embossed seal. "Every page notarized," I replied. "Every dotted line verified. You can check with counsel." Evan's face had gone pale. "You can't just barge in here," he snapped. This is outrageous. What's outrageous, I said, locking eyes with him, is the way you've mismanaged this place while selling everyone a PowerPoint dream. What's outrageous is the 38% drop in employee satisfaction under your watch, the unresolved HR complaints, the phantom travel reimbursements. I slid the next document across the table. This is a motion to remove Evan Blake as CEO effective immediately. Evan barked a laugh. Ha! You can't do this alone. I don't need anyone else, I said. I am the majority. You could hear the room tilt. A beat of silence, then from the board secretary. The motion carries. Evan didn't scream, didn't fight, just stood there stunned. For once? Out of words. And I sat down, not as a guest, but as the owner taking back his house. For a few seconds, no one moved. The room was heavy, thick with shock, like someone had just pulled the emergency brake on a speeding train. Evan stood frozen, blinking like he'd been slapped. The board members looked from him to me, then back to the documents laid out like evidence in a trial. Mr. Lowell, the secretary, broke the silence. Mr. Turner, with 70% of voting shares? You don't need a second on the motion, I nodded. Then let the record show, motion carried. Evan's jaw clenched. This is insane, he muttered. You're making a mistake. This company needs bold leadership, not nostalgia. I leaned back in the chair he used to call his and said, calm as ever, what it needs is someone who knows the difference between boldness and recklessness. Someone who listens before they dictate. Someone who knows what it took to build this from the ground up. He looked around the room for support, but no one jumped to his side. Not one. His swagger had dried up, and all that was left was a man with no chair to sit in. Finally, without a word, he gathered his tablet, straightened his suit, and walked out. No applause, no goodbyes, just the quiet sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. The kind of silence that meant something was finally over. And I didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't revenge. This was correction. And the real work was only just beginning. I didn't move into the CEO's corner office that day. In fact, I didn't even go near it. No press release, no ego-driven announcements. I grabbed my old mug from the cabinet, rolled up my sleeves, and walked the floors. Every department, every level. The place felt cold, disconnected. People stiffened when I passed, unsure what version of me they were getting now. I stopped by logistics first, my home base, and asked the crew what they needed. No speeches, just questions. Over the next few days, I did the same in engineering, HR, client relations. I listened. Really listened. Not just for ideas, but for the damage. Evan had left the place bloated with titles and empty of trust. Talented people had been ignored or buried under red tape. I made a few quiet moves that week. Promoted Angela from warehouse lead to director of ops. She'd been running the floor unofficially for 2 years. Rehired Pete, one of the best systems guys we had, who walked out months ago when they passed him over for someone flashier. Is this for real? He asked when I called. Only if you want to come back and help fix what they broke, I said. He showed up the next day. No fanfare. Just a man who gave a damn. I wasn't rebuilding a leadership team. I was restoring a backbone. No more smoke and mirrors management. It was time to make the place work again, from the floor up, the way my brother and I had always meant it to. You could feel the shift before you could see it. It started in the break room, people actually sitting down to eat again instead of hiding behind their screens. Jokes returned to the warehouse floor. Emails started with thanks instead of per my last message. I didn't need to install ping pong tables or hold pizza Fridays. What folks needed was permission to care again, and proof that someone up top cared back. I greenlit an idea from Rachel, a junior product analyst who'd been quietly refining a client retention strategy in her spare time. It had been ignored twice under Evan. We tested it, it worked. Now it's policy. When I handed her the credit in front of the team, she nearly cried. I told her, "You earned it, and around here that counts." Promotions started happening based on performance, not politics. Feedback loops were reinstalled in HR. And the whisper networks, the ones where people used to warn each other about which execs to avoid, began to fade. Not because we stamped them out, but because the problems were finally being dealt with. When people saw that they could speak up and not get punished, something cracked open. It wasn't just a job again, it was theirs. Ours. Departments started collaborating without being told to. Engineers walked into sales huddles to share insights. Frontline workers sat in on strategy meetings. That's when I knew. We weren't just getting back what we lost. We were building something stronger than before. Something real. It was close to midnight when I finally shut down my laptop and stood to leave. I'd spent the last few hours going over onboarding reports and sitting in on a late Zoom with the West Coast branch. As I passed my old office, now a shared team workspace, I noticed something on the desk I hadn't seen before. A yellow sticky note, crooked and slightly smudged. It read in simple handwriting, "Thanks for seeing us. Nate, night crew." Nate. Quiet guy. Worked janitorial overnight, hardly said more than a few words during the years I'd been there, but he always nodded when we passed each other in the halls. Always cleaned up without complaint. I stared at that note longer than I probably should have. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't for show, it was real. That little square of paper hit me harder than any executive trophy or quarterly report ever could. It told me we were turning the corner. Not because of a policy or a profit margin, but because the people who had been invisible were finally being seen. I took the note, smoothed it out, and placed it inside the front cover of my note right next to my brother's letter. Because sometimes leadership isn't about big gestures. Sometimes it's about the moments no one else notices, the quiet thank yous, the late night shifts, the small signs that tell you you're doing it right. That night, I walked out knowing this place wasn't just healing. It was finally breathing again. A week later, I finally stepped into the CEO's office. Not because I needed the title, but because it was time. The room hadn't changed much since Evan cleared out. Still had the oversized desk, the skyline view, the 2 polished floors. But I didn't bring in anything fancy. No ego wall, no gold-plated nameplate. Just one framed photo, my brother and me, standing in front of our first delivery truck, grease on our hands, and smiles like we'd just conquered the world. I said it quietly in the corner of the desk. This wasn't about taking the throne. It was about closing the loop. I looked out the window for a long minute, watching the city breathe. This place, we didn't build it to be flashy. We built it to be solid, to last. And maybe we lost sight of that for a while, but not anymore. I sat down, not with a rush of triumph, but with the calm weight of responsibility. Everything in this room, every decision going forward, had to be for the right reasons. For the people still grinding late shifts, solving customer problems, fixing broken processes without ever asking for credit. I wasn't here to make noise. I was here to make it right. Full circle doesn't mean you go back to where you started. It means you bring the lessons with you. And sitting in that chair, with my brother's photo watching over me, I knew one thing for certain. We were back where we belonged. 12 months later, the numbers were in. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. Sure, revenue was up 22%, the strongest climb in 6 years. Turnover was down by nearly half. We had new contracts coming in, and for the first time in a long time, people were staying late, not because they were afraid to leave, but because they believed in what they were building. But those weren't the numbers that stuck with me. What did? The 7 a.m. hallway chat between design and product. The intern from IT who got a standing ovation at the monthly roundup. The way Maya from procurement now led cross-department huddles without ever needing to raise her voice. This company, my brother's legacy and now mine, was finally alive again. And it wasn't because of one man sitting at the top. It was because people, real people, had been given space to rise. We traded performance theater for performance truth, flash for backbone. When I looked around that final board meeting of the fiscal year, I didn't see suits jockeying for clout. I saw a team, sales, engineering, client support, all with a seat at the table, not just invited, heard, trusted. When Richard, our newly appointed head of strategy, asked if I had anything to add before we adjourned, I stood slowly, hands resting on the back of my chair. We didn't win because we fought harder, I said. We won because we remembered who we are. And that was the whole story right there. Not revenge, not redemption, restoration. We weren't building a comeback, we were securing a legacy, one worth handing off one day. With pride, not excuses. This story isn't just about business. It's about dignity, trust, and taking back what's yours. Jack Turner didn't fight his way back for revenge. He stood up because good people were being overlooked. The foundation he helped build was cracking, and no one else was going to fix it. The lesson? Never mistake quiet for weak. Never hand over your worth to people who haven't earned it. And most of all, know your value, even when others don't. In a world that celebrates flash over grit, Jack proved that real leadership isn't loud. It's steady. It listens. It restores. If you've ever been passed over, talked down to, or told you were past your prime, remember Jack. He didn't beg for respect. He owned it. If this story hit home for you, like this video. Subscribe for more stories about real men reclaiming what's rightfully theirs. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded. You're not too old, too quiet, or too late. You might just be the only thing holding the roof up. And it's time people knew it.